One thing that we have to remember when we fall into complacency, we forget that our relationship still needs to be nurtured and it's still evolving and growing as we get older. It still needs that nurturing over time. And if you don't continue to nurture it, if you don't continue to feed into the growth that's needed to hold that strong relationship intact, again, that's where the silent killer starts to creep in, and that's where you start to grow apart and build distance in between.
Welcome to Under Pressure, the podcast about becoming better men when it counts. I'm Cody Laughlin.
And I'm Brian Alfaro. Each week, we have honest conversations about building businesses, leading families, carrying responsibility, and the pressure that comes with trying to do all of it well. If that sounds like your world, you're in the right place.
No hype, no pretending we've got it all figured out, just real stories, real struggles, and what we're learning along the way. Let's get into it.
Before we get started, if today's topic resonates with you, you'll probably enjoy The Forge. It's our free weekly newsletter where we share lessons, stories, and practical ideas around business, family, responsibility, and becoming better men. You can join at forgingbettermen.com. Now let's get into it. Cheers, Cody.
Cheers.
The other night, my wife and I followed our normal routine. We got our daughter to bed, we got the dishes done, took out the trash, made sure the house was back in order after the chaos of bringing a little one home from school. And we sat down on the couch and both of us were just exhausted. We weren't mad at each other or anything, but there was just not that feeling of like bondness and communication that you would normally feel with your spouse. And I found that being something that's very common in my life now where I'm out in parenthood. And I had this question: when was the last time we got to spend an evening together, not as mom and dad, but instead as husband and wife?
I think that's a problem that a lot of parents face. It's not unique to you. It's definitely not unique to me. This tends to happen for parents, whether you're new parents or you have multiple kids and you've been parenting for a long time. You fall into this cycle of the routine. You get up early, you get the kids ready for school, whatever activities, you got to go to work, you come home, do the same process after work. And as you mentioned, by the time that you even get time to yourself, it's later in the day and your day is already gone. You go to bed, you rinse and repeat.
And I think what I've learned too, it's not that you don't love each other any less. It's not that you don't care about that other person, but life just gets really full really fast. Your days become a blur. I was joking with my wife earlier today, actually, that I feel like life moves so much faster when you have a little one. And because it does move faster and because your day gets full so much quicker, if you're not careful, your relationship can quickly turn into feeling like your teammates or your roommates instead of husband and wife.
And being a teammate is not the same as being close to one another. So that's what we're going to talk about today, of how to make sure that you preserve the family relation or the spousal relationship and essentially date your spouse to make sure that you preserve that closeness.
So I'll kickstart this conversation, Cody, because this is all really fresh for me. For anyone who's a new listener, I have a 20-month-old at home, and life changes a lot very fast when you have a little one. I've had people ask me recently, do I remember what life is like without kids? And the answer is yes, and I can slowly see it fading away, but I still remember what life is like. And a lot of things change in your household on a day-to-day. Your routines change, but not even routines. Those are the things that I think people obviously realize are coming when they're having a kid. But things happen from a communication standpoint in the house that are very different. You often set communication aside or put it on the back burner, as we just mentioned, because you're so tired. And being tired really changes a lot. It changes your energy levels, your emotional levels, your ability to think and to just make sound judgments and to not snap when something doesn't go well. So these first 20 months that I've been in have been a huge learning curve for myself and of course for my wife. And one of the things I noticed was the communication that we had before we were married was very strong, very consistent, because we were spending a lot of moments together that didn't feel like a chore. And I mean that with like all due respect. I love my daughter. She's not a chore, but there's a lot of diaper changing. There's a lot of cleaning up after my daughter. There's a lot of playtime and reading and bath time and meal time. These are, they're repetitive tasks that you do on a daily basis. And we often don't do them together. Like my wife has her list of things that she likes to do with my daughter. I have my list of things that I like to do with my daughter. So it removed a lot of the time we had with each other being able to communicate. For example, we for 10 plus years got to sit down every night and eat dinner together. Something you could take for granted. I think when you don't have a little one, the ability to sit down with your spouse every night, either at a restaurant, which is a whole nother conversation, or just even at your house to cook dinner together, have a conversation while you're cooking, to sit down and enjoy that meal together. That all goes out the window when you have, a toddler. I'm watching my daughter, making sure she doesn't set something on fire while my wife's cooking dinner, or vice versa. And then one of us pays more attention to her while when her dinner's ready, while we're eating, and we have to kind of rotate and do those sort of exchanges. That ability to sit down with your partner at the end of the day and say, "Hey, how was your day? Is everything okay today? Was it good? Was it bad? Talk to me. What are you feeling? Is there anything I can help you with?" That all went out the window. And 20 months of not doing that, we learned very quickly, probably after maybe 6 or 9 months, that we need to get back to having these conversations, but we had to be more intentional about it. We had to start scheduling those times, planning different types of dates. But yeah, those first 20 months, man, a lot changes. And to me, the thing I think I noticed the most was the how hard it can be to actually commit and make time to communicate with your spouse to maintain that relationship that you have.
Did you almost feel like you were in survival mode?
Yeah, absolutely. There were some days where you feel like your tank's on empty, but your baby's not going to stop being a baby because you're out of gas. You got to keep going.
Yeah. I was very blessed in looking back. I have 3 kids, and my age gap between my son and my first daughter is 10 years. So we got to basically allow him to grow till he was, pretty independent at the age of 10 when my daughter came along. And so we, of course, restarted. And then my youngest came along about 5 years later. So we kind of had gaps in between the births of our children. And I think that really worked out well for us in our favor, because you could really kind of isolate and focus on one kid at a time. You see a lot of families who have children within a very close time frame. I know, like my middle brother, for example, is just about 2 years younger than I am. So we grew up real close together, right? And that is very challenging for parents, especially new parents, because it's tough enough with one kid, and dealing with the priorities shifting, the schedules, the routine, like you said, the routines that revolve around just one child, much less 2 back to back. And then you talk about the challenges with potty training and, bringing traveling, and any just something as simple as going to the store is a task when you have a baby. I will tell you now, as my kids have gotten older, my youngest is 7 now, my middle daughter's 11, soon to be 12. My oldest, he's 21, off living his life. As we've gotten older and as the kids have gotten older, I find that it's a lot easier in a way to kind of get back to those routines that you mentioned, or maybe those priorities when it comes to communicating, making time. It's really challenging when your kids are much younger, because your priorities are centered around the well-being of your children when they're young. And because they're so dependent on you at that time, your attention has to be focused on making sure that, obviously their essential needs are met, but also that you're giving your children your time to bond with them and to grow with them and to help them learn. And you start kind of instilling some of those family values even at a very young age. And as your kids get older, as they get to be a little bit more independent, I find it gets a little bit easier to start having those conversations, making more time for yourself. But the challenge that I have, and I think my wife and I have been in the midst of this as well, as you alluded to, is when you start to lose that ability to communicate or spend that time with one another, the relationship can sometimes fracture. And if you allow that to go over an extended period of time, like you said, you may be teammates and you may kind of work well in a routine, but 5 years down the road, 6 years down the road, you look back and you realize that you don't know your spouse anymore. You're completely different people 5 years later. And that's the struggle that a lot of people find themselves in, is when you divert your attention away from the relationship and put that aside, you could end up forgetting who each other is. And that's where I think a lot of families start falling apart.
Yeah. And what I've been trying to apply as sort of like an action item is I try to go back and listen to the conversations that I had with myself, one, and then with my wife, and really look back on a weekly basis and say, okay, how many intimate conversations did I have with my wife today about how was her day? How was she feeling? What does she have planned with her friends and, girls' nights, different things like that. And really trying to reflect on, am I making an effort? Because I think personally that part of the struggle is when because I think personally that we often have these challenges because we don't put enough effort in, which is understandable. You're out of gas at the end of the day. You're tired. You worked a long 7, 8, 9, 10 hour shift. You've been working all day. You picked up the kid. You did bath. You did dinner. You did playtime. It's hard to make time for these things, but you have to make time. There's no other excuse. There's no other way to really solve that problem. Is you have to be very intentional with your time. So what for me, auditing those conversations, really looking back and trying to be conscious. We've had this conversation on a separate podcast about mentioning like our wives felt like we were roommates at some point. It's like I try to always remember that conversation, because the first time I heard that, I told myself I don't ever want to hear those words come out of my wife's mouth again. And of course, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. We sometimes drift back to feeling more like teammates, more like roommates. But looking back on your conversations and then looking back on your schedule, I think that's one of the best ways to try to avoid yourself getting into that trap.
I'm an advocate for prioritizing the relationship with your spouse over anything else, including your children. And you've heard me say this before. I think we've even talked about it in prior episodes. And the reason why I'm such an advocate for this is because it really matters. When you don't have that strong bond and relationship as spouses, it's going to be very hard for you to be an effective parent as well. And the fractured relationship that can be created through lack of communication, lack of time spent, that shows and becomes evident in your family culture, your family environment. Your kids pick up on those subtle things. And for some people, it may be subtle, right? For some people, the kids may just notice that, well, we don't have a really cohesive family unit. Mom and dad don't spend a lot of time together, or mom and dad are always busy doing their, parental duties or job duties. But as a family unit, we don't have that cohesiveness. For others, it may be something a little bit more extreme where there's more arguments or fight or more verbal confrontation, and kids pick up and learn on those behaviors as well. But it's a long way of saying and re-emphasizing the point that it really does matter when you talk about the relationships. You have to have a strong bond with your spouse first before you can have a good bond and family unit.
Yeah. So we're talking about this so-called roommate syndrome. If you're a man out there and you feel like you have roommate syndrome with your wife, you feel like you're not a partner to her anymore, you feel like a roommate or a teammate because of your early struggles maybe you're going through as a new parent. What are some things that you've noticed that are warning signs that you can maybe pick up on early into your early parenthood journey to kind of help prevent you getting that teammate or roommate syndrome?
I do think it's probably unique to each individual relationship and partnership, because obviously everybody responds to stressors differently. For me, and just speaking in general, some of the most subtle things that you'll begin to see is the lack of attention to one another when you're in the same space. For example, if we're both home in the evening and we're both maybe preparing for dinner, and you start to notice that you're no longer engaging with one another. Maybe one person is just isolated to their own thing that they're working on, or their own mindset. They're not really paying attention to what's happening in the room or the environment. And although that for some people, you may be like, oh, that doesn't really sound feasible, but it's true. I mean, think about how often you find yourself you're in the zone. You're just thinking about the task ahead of you. And let's be honest, I don't know about you, but for my wife, she's very much a forward thinker. It's especially when it comes to being a mom. It's not just, okay, I've got to do this one task. It's, okay, I got to do this. It becomes this laundry list of all the things that she's got to do just to get ready for bed in this example. And so it's very easy to be caught up in the like you said, the routine, and not having that engagement with anybody else. So I think just noticing that there's very little engagement and interaction in the same room. And then I think irritability starts to play a factor too. You start noticing that sometimes the littlest things can really ignite frustrations or certain responses that maybe normally in a normal circumstance wouldn't bother you, or you wouldn't really pay attention to. But because you're so much in the routine and you're just focused on getting through the day, that you can allow those things to build and start to affect you in a way that sometimes you don't even realize until you're in the moment.
Catching these warning signs early is important, because it's important that your kids see a strong marriage at home and a strong relationship with your spouse. Whether we realize it or not, kids benefit from that. When they see mom and dad acting not only as mom and dad, but as husband and wife that show affection, show love, hug each other, kiss each other, play with each other, like, joke with each other, right? Have a good bond together, deal with challenges together in a lighthearted way. That has a domino effect or an impact on your kids when they see that from afar versus seeing two people in the same room that never talk to each other, that don't share stories with each other, don't share emotions with each other, don't comfort each other. That has an impact whether you realize it or not on the foundation you're laying for the child. Yeah, you may be spending all your time and energy and thinking you're being a great parent, giving 100% of your attention to your kid. And that is often something that I even catch myself doing where all my time and energy and thoughts and emotions are going into my daughter, that I forget to focus and put our relationship first, as you were mentioning. But when kids feel that balance, the balance of love in a house being well balanced between mom and the child, I'm not far enough along in my journey to say like, oh yeah, for sure this is going to benefit. But you being somebody who has kids, you're 40 now, so
Easy, easy.
so you're an expert. But you being farther along in your journey, having an older son and two older daughters, would you agree that balance, having that balanced household you've seen a positive impact in your kids from that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The balance, as you mentioned, is the essential bedrock of preserving the family unit and preserving the relationship. And I think one way to do that, one actionable item that really worked for us is making it a priority to have that check-in on ideally a daily basis, but even a weekly basis, just to force that isolated time just for you and your spouse to check in and say, hey, how are you doing today? How are you doing this week? How are you feeling just in general? And just having that open dialogue and most importantly, uninterrupted. Sometimes that means, my wife and I, we like to go outside and maybe sit on the back porch and, the kids may be playing inside or whatever. That's our time to go have a conversation. Sometimes we'll go walking around the block, even just a lap around our little block. So I think it's important that you make it a priority each week to have that uninterrupted time for each other, to keep the open dialogue and make sure that the conversations can flow and that you can still build that bond with each other.
Dating your wife does not have to be complicated. Maintaining the strong relationship with your wife after you have a little one and you add somebody to your family does not have to be complicated. I think prioritizing connection over entertainment is one thing I know I've tried and that you can do at home to try to keep your relationship strong. A lot of times when you're younger, especially when you're in your 20s, there's a lot of entertainment that goes on between you and your spouse. You're going out to the movies, you're going to the bar, you're grabbing drinks, you're going to the club, you're hanging out with friends, you're doing all these adventurous things with your wife. And that is both connection and entertainment. To your point, little things, going for a walk, sitting down and watching a show together and talking while you're watching the show. You can make a date night of something, right? Going and putting a scheduled planned date night, but keeping those things simple, they don't have to be complicated, is something that I've learned that goes a long way. Those walks, as you mentioned, every night, 15 minutes or every other night, whatever works for you and your schedule, they can have a drastic impact on the strength of your marriage.
Well, since you were poking at my age, I'm going to go ahead and lean into that a little bit more. But I find that as I'm getting older, and I think my wife would agree, is we still value the opportunities to have shared experiences. We still value the opportunities to travel or go find those moments where we can go enjoy some entertainment. We love going to shows, plays, things like that. But I find that as we've gotten older, the focus and emphasis on how do we connect with one another is more important than the experience itself. And again, it doesn't have to be complicated. You're absolutely right. It can be something just as simple as the nightly walk that we do on occasion, or just sitting on the back porch. Sometimes it's just laying in bed at night and just talking, but ultimately, again, it's more about the shared time that we have together over the entertainment value of going out on a date and such like that. And so,
but I will tell you, there's a lot of value in dating your wife and actually taking her out on dates as well as your relationship changes after you have a kid. For example, my wife and I today, actually, we both have she has off for a holiday, and me being entrepreneurial, obviously I can take the day off. So I made it a priority versus saying like, hey, let's just go to lunch together, is I took the whole day off so that we can drop my daughter off at school, enjoy the morning together, knock out some chores around the house, of course, and then go and really do some things that we used to do back before we have a kid and really just move at our own pace, enjoy lunch, go to a coffee shop, hang out, talk. And we didn't do anything drastic. We didn't have to go to some crazy thing that, was really more entertainment than anything. We just enjoyed a meal together, sat down at a coffee shop for 45 minutes and just talked. Right. Talking and making a priority to have those conversations and asking each other, how have you been? Or there's some things that, I could be doing better. And then her asking me the same question. It tends to go a long way in at least taking the temperature of how the relationship is. Where is the relationship? Is it in a good place? Is it in a kind of a rocky place? Does one person need to put a little bit more time and effort into a particular area? And is the other person happy? Asking that question and making it simple, not making it complicated, not overthinking it. I think as guys, sometimes we overthink things. We're like, we got to put a plan in place, and it's got to be a day, and there's got to be this big thing, and there's got to be this and then that, and then I'm going to ask how she's doing. It's like, no, just go for a walk and say, hey, how are you? Or go grab a cup of coffee together if you don't have your kids. Hey, how's it going? How are you? How can I help?
This is a thing, this is an area that I think that as men, we can do better at, especially as our relationships, grow and get older. My wife and I, we've been together 20 years. We're going to be married for 18 here, actually in a few days. And what I find is when I think back when we were younger in our relationship, the amount of effort that I put in, focusing on myself, that I put into, hey, let's go on a date. Let's go do whatever activity. Let's go do whatever. Fill in the blank. I put in a lot of that time and effort, and so did she, to make those initiatives, to put ourselves out there and make it a priority. And as our relationships gotten older, and then you start introducing more and more kids, that effort kind of dwindles. And whether it's purposeful or not is irrelevant. It's you find yourself kind of falling into the routines, and then you lose that. I hate to say drive, but you kind of lose that initiative to put out that effort. And I think that's what our wives expect of us. And I do think that as our wives get more ingrained with the daily schedule of managing the household, managing kids, and I do think that the moms, our wives, carry the stress of parenthood a lot differently than we do as men. I think that the obligation falls on us to make sure that we're still putting out the effort to show that we want to be intentful about spending that time with them alone.
What you're describing, Cody, talks about some of the mistakes I think men make. And that's a great example of one mistake men make. And I think one of the mistakes I've made as well is thinking we're fine, like we're doing okay, means that we're connected, right? You can feel as a man like you're doing your job. You're going to work, you're providing, money's coming in, you're doing all the chores and tasks that are required to take care of your son or your daughter. All the boxes are getting checked, the house is getting taken care of, and things feel okay. You're like, we're fine. Well, just because you're fine doesn't mean that your wife feels that same feeling. And as I like to joke, is we're not mind readers, but we often assume that because things are fine, to use that term, that your wife feels the same way and she feels that emotional connection that you're feeling. And I think again, back to communication, having communication with your wife and not just asking her, like, how are you doing? And she's like, I'm okay. That's not what you want to hear. Like, no, like, how are you doing? Right? Like, go deeper than that. And I've made that mistake as well. And she always goes, my wife always jokes, well, thanks for chatting with me. It's like, she's like, how was your day? And I'm like, good. And then there's that awkward, she's like, well, thanks for chatting with me today. It's like, well, you have to be more vulnerable. We've talked about this on other episodes, and more willing to share how you're feeling, which obviously as guys, we don't do a great job of. But don't just assume that because things are fine and you're fine and somebody says good or fine, that things are okay. You have to, as a man, put the effort in to go a little bit deeper in the conversation. And then also, if you're being asked that question, share a little bit more. Get a little bit more vulnerable with your wife. It's not a sign of weakness if you're a man and your wife asks you, hey, how are you doing? And you're completely honest with her and tell her you're not doing so well. Things aren't going so well. Maybe I'm exhausted physically. Maybe I'm emotionally exhausted. Maybe I need to take some time off and recharge my batteries from work to kind of get my priorities in line. That's not a sign of weakness. In my opinion, that's a sign of strength, being completely transparent with your wife, letting down your guard, being vulnerable, because your wife is your partner. Your wife is there to go to battle with you and to support you. But if she doesn't truly know how you're feeling and you're just saying, oh, I'm fine, we're good, she's never going to be able to help you on your journey to being the best version of yourself.
I'm a firm believer that complacency is one of the many silent killers of a relationship. One thing that we have to remember, and I'm guilty of this as well, when we fall into complacency, we forget that our relationship still needs to be nurtured, and it's still evolving and growing as we get older. Just because you've been together for so long, again, in my case, my wife and I for 20 years, I know her intimately. She knows me intimately. And we always joke because we say, okay, we know each other better than we know our own selves, which I think is 100% true. But we still have to realize that your relationship, it's still growing. It still needs that nurturing over time. And if you don't continue to nurture it, if you don't continue to feed into the growth that's needed to hold that strong relationship intact, again, that's where the silent killer starts to creep in, and that's where you start to grow apart and build distance in between.
The mistake that we make often in regards to this is that we wait for life to slow down to try to address it. We're waiting for things to settle down. We're waiting for our work to get easier, for our job demands to slow down, for our kid to get less needy, for life to get less chaotic. Life doesn't get less chaotic as your kids age and as your relationship develops. It stays chaotic, and you have to learn to adapt as a husband, as a father to that environment and stay nimble and stay on your toes, but at the same time, be very aware of how you're feeling, how you're doing, but also how your wife is doing and how she's feeling. And then those are two totally separate things. What you were describing a minute ago to me sounds like, when you think about a relationship is a living, breathing thing. It requires, just like your kid, it requires energy, it requires effort. It takes food, not in the form of like physical food you stick in its mouth, but it takes an input, right, in order to continue to maintain it, to continue to grow it. So if you're not feeding your relationship and taking care of it and nurturing it like you would a kid or like you would a pet or like you would a plant, what happens to anything that doesn't get that? It dies.
It dies. So Brian, let's talk about some actionable items then, or some things that we can do to slow down a little bit, disconnect from the routine, and make sure that we nurture that relationship with our spouse and make sure that we continue to build that bond with our spouse. So let's talk about some things that we can do that we can put into practice.
For me, the number one thing, especially because of how I operate in business, has been putting things on the calendar. This is going to sound really silly to a lot of people, but if you don't put things like date night or talk to my wife about finances or check in with my spouse about something that you know is important to her or go for a walk with your spouse at the end of the night, if you don't put those things on the calendar, they tend to get skipped more often than not. The idea or the exercise or the habit, I should say, of putting things on the calendar requires practice, just like anything else. So if you're thinking after listening to this episode that you want to start dating your wife a little bit better, you want to start putting more time and effort in to be a better husband, to be a better man, and to strengthen your relationship, I would say step one is look at the list of things you could be doing. Again, keep it simple. You don't need to overcomplicate it. Wine nights, walks at the end of the day or on the weekends, date nights if you're able to squeeze them in. Put those things on the calendar. And it doesn't mean that they need to happen every day. You don't need to go from a 0 to 100. You can go from no times a month to once a month. Once a month is a realistic goal for yourself when you're thinking about going from 0 to nothing. But if you don't put things on the calendar, they're never going to happen.
I'm that person. If it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist. So that's a great advice. For me, one of the things that I think is critical is to lower the bar, lower the expectation. You don't have to shoot for the home run when it comes to dating your spouse or spending time with your spouse. My wife loves to travel. She would travel every week if she could. But that's unrealistic. It's unrealistic that we can go on a vacation or we can get away every week or every other week or even once a month, right? So for us, it's about consistency over perfection. Maybe it's that daily walk every night, or maybe it's that one date night or day date or whatever your connection is with your wife. Maybe it's that one time a week, right? But making sure that you're being consistent in those little habits and making sure that they're intentful and just continue to do that over and over and over. And that will go so much further than just trying to take that, trying to aim for that home run and setting such a high bar for yourself that ultimately doesn't get achieved. And then you get frustrated and then it just compounds on the distance that you build in your relationship.
Definitely. I would say if you're going from 0 to 100 and you think you're going to start going on 5 walks a week and have 5 conversations with your wife every week, you're going to set yourself up for failure. So I like, saying rig the game to win, start small. Like you said, consistency over perfection. And with all that the two examples that we've mentioned so far, putting things on the calendar, and then for yours, the actionable items of actually going on a walk or doing these things. One of the things that I try to do is try to make it phone free, which can sound really crazy for some people. And I know it's challenging if you're doing something and maybe there's a sitter involved and you're having to kind of keep an eye on your phone. But ideally, if you're trying to spend time with your spouse, but you're spending all the time with your spouse looking at your phone or checking your phone every 5 minutes, you're killing the moment. You're discounting the value that you're trying to create in that moment with your wife, and ruining the relationship and the bond you could be having with your wife. And I see this all the time at restaurants, especially with young couples, but it's much different. They come from a different generation, but two people that are sitting down for a date, or a husband and a wife, or a mom and a dad, they're sitting down for a date and both people are glued to their phones. Well, how are you going to build an intimate connection and check on somebody and bond with somebody if you're both staring at your phones the entire time? So if you're going to make one of these commitments of going for a walk, going on a date night, sitting down drinking a glass of wine, sitting on the back porch at night just to talk, leave your phone inside. You don't need a phone to build a relationship and to strengthen your relationship with your partner.
So that's a great segue into a point that's really worked well for me, and something that I continue to work on, which is asking better questions, getting more substance out of the conversations we have. And you do that by really being intentful about the engagement that you have with your spouse. What type of information are you trying to extract out of your wife? It's like you said earlier, it's not like, hey, how was the weather today? Or it's really being really engaging and trying to understand what they are really feeling or going through in that moment, in that, in that situation, that day, and really trying to dig deeper into the root of their spirit and, that connection.
Better questions get better answers.
Absolutely.
It's as simple as that. If you're asking your wife or your partner questions on trying to figure out how they're doing in life to make sure that they're doing okay, that the kid's not stressing them out, work's not stressing them out, life's not stressing them out. Again, just saying, how are you doing? It may not be a deep enough question. You got to go a little bit deeper. So asking better questions. And with all these things we're talking about, I think the number one thing that I've learned is once you start establishing these habits or these rules or these tools and these processes you follow within your house and how you run your house and how you run your relationship or manage your relationship together as a couple, is once you have these things, you really have to protect them. Because these things are hard to establish. This is not easy. You can't wave a magic wand and sort of address maybe potential tension or issues you're having with your partner. You have to chip away. It's like somebody chopping wood or chopping down a tree, or they say, you have to eat an elephant one bite at a time. You can't just wave a wand and all these things start happening. But as you start building these habits, as you start becoming somebody who asks more intentional questions, somebody who puts things on the calendar, somebody who starts building a stronger relationship with their partner, you have to protect that with all your might, because the world will find a way to try to take it away from you. Our phones are very distracting. Work can be very distracting. Family members, you love them, but they can sometimes be distracting. There are things in the world that will try to pull your attention from your relationship. And if you don't have all eyes on the prize, which is a strong relationship in this example, it's easy to get distracted and fall right back into the rabbit hole you were in.
And what's the first thing that comes out of your mouth in those situations? Well, life is busy, or I have this going on, or we have this going on. You start making excuses and validating the reasons why you don't have the time. And all you're telling yourself is that's not a priority for me. Here's the spoiler alert. Life is never going to be simple. It's never going to slow down. It's never going to be not busy, especially when you have kids. There's always going to be something that's going to be pulling or demanding your time. So just to reemphasize, the point you're making is you have to invest the effort. You have to make the priority to schedule that time for yourself and for your wife. And you have to make it the priority above all else. And like you said, protect it. So that way you don't allow those excuses to validate the reasons why that's not a priority.
Got it. So Cody, I want to challenge you, myself, and some of our listeners. What are some things you think we can do to shift gears here? If you're stuck in the rut, if maybe you feel like your relationship's fractured with your wife and you're not dating your wife, you feel like your roommates, your teammates, you're not partners in life right now, you're not partners in crime, so to speak. What is some advice, or what are some questions or some actionable advice to our listeners? What's one challenge we can give our listeners going into the upcoming week?
My challenge to the listeners this week would be to plan that one intentional moment with your wife this week. Doesn't matter what day, doesn't matter what what that moment is, you define it, but make it your priority for this week and remove all other barriers or obstacles out of your way this week. Make that your sole focus for this week and plan it out and be intentful about that time that you spend with her.
I want to leave our audience with one thought that I was having the other day when we were putting this show together. And that thought is that your kids aren't in your house forever. One day they're going to grow up, they're going to move on, and they're not going to need mom and dad anymore. And what's the one thing you have left that's not leaving the house? Hopefully, it's your relationship with your partner. It's your relationship with your wife. And if you're not protecting that and working on it over the 18 years that your kid's at home, or 20 years, or however long they end up living at home, you're going to find that when that kid, or when your kids, if you have more than one kid, leave the house is going to feel empty, of course, physically, because that child is no longer there. But you're going to also feel very empty inside. Your relationship's going to feel very empty. You're going to feel very empty. Your partner's going to feel very empty. And it's going to feel very awkward that you just spent the last 18 or 20 years being roommates versus being partners. If you think that excitement is just coming back that you had prior to marriage, whenever your kids leave, that's not going to happen. It's not going to be the same as it was 20 years ago if you haven't been dating each other and working on your relationship the entire time. So just something to think about going into the week.
Appreciate you being here with us. Stay connected by joining our weekly newsletter called The Forge, delivered straight to your inbox with thoughts on business, work, family, and becoming a better man. Make sure to check out forgingbettermen.com to sign up. If this show hits home for you, then hit the follow button and leave us a review to help us reach more guys who would benefit from it. This is Under Pressure.